And I'll call this meeting to order of the regular board meeting for Desert Water Agency on December 3rd, 2024. Some housekeeping items before we get started. For those of us in the room, if you could remember to silence your electronic devices. And for those that are participating virtually, if you could keep yourselves muted until you're ready to speak during public comment or at some other time that's appropriate. I will be calling on directors in the following roll call order, which is Director Gracia, Director Bloomer, Secretary Treasurer McKenna, Vice President Bowman, and President Ortega. And all votes will be conducted via roll call. And with that, if we could move to the next item, and if I could ask Director Gracia to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next will be the roll call. And Ms. Baca, if you could do that, please.
Director Gracia,
Present.
Director Bloomer,
Present.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Present.
Vice President Bowman,
Here.
and President Ortega.
Present.
All present.
Thank you. Next will be public comment on items that are not listed on today's agenda. So this is an opportunity for members of the public to approach the board and speak on an item that's relevant to the Desert Water Agency, but is not on today's agenda. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And have we received any public comment?
No public comments have been received.
Thank you. All right, if there are members of the public who would like to speak at the moment on an item not on today's agenda, please approach the podium or raise your hand virtually. And seeing none, we can move to item 5, which is public comment on items that are listed on today's agenda. Again, we ask you to keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes. If there are any, it doesn't seem so. So we can move to item 6, which is a presentation by Greg Morrison of NWRA's Executive Vice President. We'd like to ask you to the podium, if you don't mind. You can start your presentation. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think I can do without the glasses, thanks to Sylvia printing me a nice large copy so I can see the words. I appreciate you letting me spend a few minutes with you this morning on what is NWRA and what we're looking to try and accomplish with partnerships throughout the state of California. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. My name's Greg Morrison. Let's see if, oh wait, is it, yeah, it's on.
To the right. Is it not?
It looks like it's on.
You're doing the arrow to the right? Okay, let me try it again. Let me stop share. Give me just a minute.
Okay.
Click it to the right. I just want to see on my screen if it's working. No. Okay. Let's see. Let me try it again.
There's no light on here?
It's on the left-hand side. There's a green.
Right,
Is it
it's
green?
but
Okay.
I don't know if there's...
Hold on. Hit it one left or right on your... It's not... Okay, I will have to use... Doing it at all? I'll just go to the PDF. Sorry about that.
If I may, while we're waiting on the technical difficulties, just by way of introduction as well, if I may, President Ortega, and good morning members of the board. So we have been members of NWRA for many, many years, and we have seen a few different executive vice presidents. And so Mr. Morrison is here also for the Aqua Conference this week, and some of us attended the NWRA annual conference a couple of weeks ago in Albuquerque, and so we figured this might be a good time also for Greg to stop in and introduce himself, and we could talk about the partnership between NWRA and Desert Water Agency. And I'll let him introduce himself more thoroughly, but Greg is not a stranger to California water, and he worked, I wouldn't say locally, but in the state for many, many years. With that, I think we might be ready. It might be easier to also say next slide, perhaps, but
No problem.
we're really excited to have you here and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Victoria. I appreciate it. I'll go ahead and get into it. I believe you have the presentation in your board packet as well. So just want to let you know, born and raised in Southern California and has spent basically 30 plus years in government and communications career in all of Southern California. Spent the last 23 years doing communications and advocacy for Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District, just west of here. Retired from there 2 years ago and decided to move to Idaho. But in that time, and start someplace new. But the 30-year career that I established here has been an incredible journey, and I've gained a lot of experience, and I'm very, very familiar with California water issues and definitely water issues in the West. I actually participated on behalf of Aqua on the NWRA board for a few years before I retired from Elsinore Valley. So I've been involved and had what I think is a very successful career here in Southern California in the water background. So next slide. Just to give you an idea of some of the key achievements that I accomplished during my tenure at Elsinore Valley. A lot of different federal grants. We were very successful lobbying on the Hill for grant money. We've also been successful with legislation at the state level for consolidation. We consolidated a small mutual water company into our agency. Early on in my career at Elsinore Valley, they were trying to do a pump storage project where you pump water out of Lake Elsinore and up to the Ortega Mountains and store it and generate electricity coming down. And it was a big project. It never ultimately went anywhere, but I managed the communication program for that project while they were pushing for it. And then, like I said, spent a lot of time in Sacramento and successfully passed some legislation to give us a public health and safety code exemption for one of our drinking water reservoirs because it had body contact on it. And then a lot of customer communication on many different levels. So next slide. So I want to spend a little time this morning letting you know kind of what we've seen from NWRA's perspective on why federal water policy is so important, certainly in the western states. This will kind of give you an idea of where I see the two, that issue and Desert Water Agency kind of coming together, melding together on some of the issues. But as you know, I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but Southern California is the hub of innovation in water management, but it is reliant on federal policy and funding to help implement what we're trying to do here, not only in Southern California, but certainly statewide. We have a lot of challenges that we experience here, again, that you're familiar with, the droughts, dependence on imported water, et cetera. But I think Desert Water Agency's leadership in conservation and water recycling and maintaining sustainable groundwater, I think is key to advancing water reliability, certainly in Southern California. So there's a connection there between the federal and what you're doing locally. Next slide, yeah. Just to kind of give you an idea what we're looking at right now, the federal legislative landscape, there's the bipartisan infrastructure law. These are all issues you're probably very well familiar with. EPA's focus on PFAS, et cetera. And then time for water recycling and desalination under Title 16 from the Bureau of Reclamation. Really the point I want to make here is that you're all familiar with these issues. We're looking at, come January 1st, going to be some interesting interesting environment on a lot of this. Is there going to be, for instance, is there going to be clawback or an attempt to claw back money that's provided under the bipartisan infrastructure law, the regulations that are proposed now under existing rules for EPA on PFAS? Those are all there. Is the new administration going to try and roll back some of those regulations? What's it going to look like? Nobody really knows right now. We can speculate all day long based on current cabinet appointments that the president-elect has made, but there's going to need to be a concerted and coordinated effort in Washington, D.C. to make sure that what they're doing out there doesn't negatively impact projects that you all are doing here to manage water supply and a sustainable water supply. So it's going to be an interesting year for sure in Congress. Next slide. Again, back to my point of making sure that NWRA understands what it is you're doing here for drought resiliency and water supply sustainability. It's important to bring that to light when we're giving examples on the Hill. If we're there lobbying on a particular issue, PFAS for instance, what are you all doing locally that's a good project that we can point to as an example of, hey, we're making some strides here. Don't cut our legs out from under us while we're trying to do this. So what Desert Water Agency is doing is going to be key, along with all of our member states. One of the big ones I know that is important to Desert Water Agency is the Rebate Tax Parity Act. For rebates, that's it's an important issue, and I know it's not just Desert Water Agency's issue. A lot of water agencies want to see something happen there, make sure that it doesn't kind of fall by the wayside. It needs to be implemented. So also, what's the role of federal support? There needs to be collaboration, obviously, with the Bureau of Reclamation on recharge projects and funding grant programs under the WaterSmart program, et cetera, to help agencies like Desert Water Agency continue to move forward and do those innovative projects. Next slide. Thank you. Just really quick on the Colorado River. Obviously, we know it's basically the lifeblood for the desert, but also for Southern California. There's a lot of challenges on it, on the river. But the federal role in compact negotiations is going to be key, and Desert Water Agencies need to advocate for fair treatment of California's senior water rights on that river is going to be incredibly important. Water exchange for resiliency, again, Desert Water Agencies enhancing local reliability through your strategic exchange agreement with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And then there's federal investment in large-scale desal or atmospheric water generation technologies, just to name a few that we want to make sure we're keeping an eye on. Next slide. Again, I mentioned this already, but the WaterSmart programs, in advanced purified water projects, and then opportunities for the desert communities on new technologies and federal incentives for treating and reusing brackish groundwater, et cetera. Next slide, please. These are some of the big ones for us, the water quality mandates or the regulations, like I mentioned earlier, on PFAS. A big one I know that Desert Water Agency is advocating for is the passive receiver liability exemptions. And that basically says, look, if we're getting water and treating water that already has PFAS in it, and then our discharge has PFAS in it, we shouldn't be held liable for that, for PFAS in the discharge. So that's one of the big things that we as NWRA are going to be looking at wholesale on the federal level this next year. And then ensuring affordability while meeting EPA's new guidelines. We don't know what those are going to look like, if they're going to be clawed back with the new administration, but we need to be at the table making sure they understand their actions, what it means, where the rubber meets the road in our local agencies. So next slide. Obviously, I know Victoria does an excellent job advocating with federal legislators and state legislators, highlighting Desert Water Agency's innovative programs. but I think it helps their participation with NWRA. It helps leverage that kind of coalition where we're in Washington, D.C., advocating on a general level of all of these issues. It's good to have these partners like Desert Water Agency there with us, working on that. Next slide, please. So basically, for the future of the Desert Water Agency, this is kind of what I think, what I see, and hopefully it matches what you're looking for, is to emphasize the importance of federal-state collaboration in addressing long-term water challenges, obviously, and that's what NWRA wants to focus on. Desert Water Agency's role as a leader in the sustainable desert water management, and really a call to action for local stakeholders to engage in advocacy efforts for federal support. So not only Desert Water Agency, but its key stakeholders and opinion leaders in the area joining in with you to make those arguments in DC. Next slide. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a quote. I'm not sure where it came from. I happened to find it, but I thought it was pretty interesting. In the face of scarcity, which we have here, we innovate. In the heart of the desert, we thrive. Together, we shape a resilient water future. And I think that's indicative of what Desert Water Agency is doing out here, certainly from a regional standpoint. And I think carries a lot of weight and influence in Washington, D.C. So next slide. Just a quick review of the value of NWRA representing water interests in Washington, D.C., influencing federal legislation and policies, and the policies underneath that is regulation. Certainly a networking opportunity to collaborate with other water leaders in the West, and access to our conferences and forums, some of the resources that we provide as well, expert analysis on water policy trends, and educational tools and resources. So I just want to say we appreciate Desert Water Agency's participation in NWRA. It's been critical for us, especially in this particular area, out in the desert area, to show really our federal legislators and administration folks what you can do when you collaborate and work together with the federal government on grant funding, et cetera. So I just want to say thank you for the time this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions or comments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We'll start with Director Gracia. Do you have any comments or questions for Ms. Morrison?
No comments, really. Just thank you very much for the presentation. It's very helpful to be more aware of who our partners are out there and who's doing what for us. Also, someday I'd like to develop a better understanding of why we take a kind of step back approach to the work on the Colorado River. It's vitally important to us, but we're not really involved because we don't really have, I guess, water rights on the river. It's the agreements that we have with MWD to receive that water, but someday I'd like to better understand that part of it. And if anybody wants to chime in on that, I'd be, grateful to hear about it. But that's the one thing on that subject that you talked about that has always kind of, why are we taking a kind of a backseat of involvement in river policy? So there you have it. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
No questions, just thank you for coming this morning, and we'll see you around the Aqua Conference.
Yes, thank you, Director.
And Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Yeah, thank you for the prepresentation. I think we have a bumpy road ahead of us with this incoming administration, and we're all going to be busy trying to provide that resilience you talk about. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
No questions, but thank you, Victoria, for bringing our speaker today and for the involvement.
Thank you.
And I'll just follow on that. I appreciate you coming here today. I appreciate you coming to the Aqua Conference also. And we look forward to hearing more about in the coming year or coming couple of years about how NWRA will help us better understand what's happening in Washington, D.C. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's an upcoming event in Washington, D.C. in end of April. Yeah.
Yes.
So
That's
I
correct.
think some of us will be participating in that as well.
That would be fantastic. Look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. And yes, there's going to be a lot of moving targets this next year in the water community, like I mentioned in my presentation. So for us to collaborate and work together is going to be absolutely critical. So thank you so much for the support. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. All right, so we can move to item 7, which is the consent calendar. We typically look at the consent calendar as one item and vote accordingly. But if there are items that are contained within the consent calendar that one of the directors would like to have further discussion about, please let me know. If not, then I will entertain a motion for accepting the consent calendar as presented.
I move we adopt item 7 as presented.
Thank you. I'll look for a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. So we have a first from Director Gracia, a second from Director Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 8 is an action item. It is request acceptance of Vasquez and Company LLP annual audit report for 2023-2024. And I believe that is our finance director, Ms. Sines, who will start with the introduction at least.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Yes, we have successfully completed our financial statements and the audit of those financial statements for fiscal year 23-24. And Roger Martinez here at the podium, he is the managing partner on our audit, as well as we do have Emer Fabro. He was actually managing the audit itself, so he's the one that our accounting supervisor, Jason Slough, who is in the audience with us today, worked closely with throughout the engagement. And and Roger is going to be presenting the report of our audited financial activities for fiscal year 23-24, and we'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have with regards to the audit. And this audit, we are kind of on a timeline since we do have an outstanding bond issuance to maintain our compliance with the continuing disclosure requirements. We then, after we have our financial statements finalized and published, we will be providing those audited financial statements for that bond disclosure by December 26th. And with that, I will pass it off to Roger.
Sir.
Welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. Always a pleasure to be here. As Esther mentioned, we have completed the annual financial statement audit for the district. And what we need to do today is just go over the required communications, discuss with you the results of the audit, go over the areas of focus, and just really be able to answer any questions that you may have. Next slide. And these are the items that we're going to cover today over the next 10, 15 minutes. Next slide. Your audit really requires multiple individuals to work on your engagement. One of the key components from this slide that you see here is the fact that we have a multidisciplinary team, including not only just regular auditors, financial statement auditors, but we also have IT auditors that are involved in the audit, making sure that we're able to, for us to be able to rely on system-generated reports, we need to be able to test your systems. We also look into your general information technology controls, as well as application controls. The second component is quality control review. And that's the reason why we always have a second partner looking not only at the deliverables that have been presented to you, to make sure that those deliverables are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, but also to make sure that the work that the team is doing is in accordance with government auditing standards. Next slide. Your audit really, and this goes with almost all audits that we perform, there are multiple steps that we take. First, really gaining understanding of what transpired during the year, gaining understanding of what are the significant issues, so that we can plan procedures to address those risks during the audit. It is about gaining understanding of your internal controls, what has transpired from changes in personnel, procedures, anything that it is different, we gaining understanding because your audit is a risk-based audit that it is controls driven. You're dealing with individually significant items throughout the year. And when we're coming here to do an audit, a big component of what we do is really place reliance on your controls by testing those controls and ultimately testing the numbers themselves, which is what it gets presented in your financial statements. And we design procedures to address a specific risk. And the last part is actually reporting. This is where we get to evaluate the results of our procedures to render an opinion, but to also determine if there are any compliance issues that we need to bring to your attention. And those issues could be from internal control weaknesses that are considered to be significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, as well as compliance matters that need to be elevated to your level or to any granting agency. Next slide. So based upon the next slide, based upon the results of the procedures that we perform, we are rendering an unmodified opinion. That is a clean opinion. We believe that your financial statements present in all material respects your financial position, the results of operations, the changes in your net position, as well as your cash flows. There were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that were identified during the course of the audit. There was no material noncompliance that would have a material impact on your financial statements that was identified during the course of the audit. Next slide. As I mentioned to you before, when we do an audit, we're thinking, if something were to go wrong, where would that occur? And we gain that understanding through just our industry knowledge of auditing water agencies, but also having conversations, interviews, not only of members of management, individuals within the organization, as well as board members. Something that you'll see here, and I'm not going to go into all of the detail, but these are some of the key areas that we look into. Cash and cash equivalents. It is about the susceptibility to misappropriation, and we perform specific procedures to test those balances. Investments. Are you following your own investment policies? The state of California. You have, and I believe it's over 200 million that you have in cash? Oh, I'm sorry, in investments. Yeah. More than 300 million. So, testing those balances, making sure, once again, not only are we testing for the existence, but also the valuation of those investments. There were no exceptions that were identified during the course of the audit. Next slide. In a similar fashion with your receivables, how are you accounting? And it's not just about the receivables themselves, but it's also about the revenue recognition process. The entire flow from the moment that you bill a ratepayer, how that gets processed and recognized into your financial statements, into the income recognition, as well as ultimately collecting those receivables. Capital assets. As a water agency, you do have significant capital projects, and this is where we get to test not only the additions, the deletions, any potential impairments that are recognized, and also just making sure that you are properly disclosing the activity in your financial statements. Next slide. Expenditures. It is about making sure that there is proper classification and the identification of expenditures throughout the year. When it comes to liabilities, it is about the potential underreporting of those liabilities, and we perform procedures to test the underreporting of all liabilities that are being presented in your financial statements. The recurring thing that you'll see here is there were no material exceptions that were identified as a result of our procedures. Next slide. Next slide. Something else that we also look into is not just about the account balances, but it's also about other risks, such as related party transactions. Were there any related party transactions that we need to test in order to determine if you follow your own guidelines to make sure that there are no conflicts? And if there are conflicts, how you're addressing that. And that is considered to be a fraud risk factor. And that's for all organizations, if we identify related party transactions. It is also about management override of controls. You can have the best system of controls, but if management overrides those controls, then they are of no use to you. And we perform specific procedures primarily through utilizing our own software to analyze data, analyze journal entries throughout the year. Are there any journal entries being posted in the middle of the night or with random numbers being posted during the weekends? And I know that with the pandemic, that's not always the case because now people are working practically at all times. But it is definitely something that we have to look into just to determine if there's any potential override of controls. No such issues were identified. Next slide. The most significant estimates in your financial statements have to deal with pension and OPEB. There are actuarial calculations that are being prepared. We review them. We look as to the assumptions, but also very important, the underlying data. Is the underlying data accurate and complete that is being used by the actuaries? And we perform procedures for that. When it comes to your recognition of leases, we talked about this a couple of years ago, and it's about how they're being recognized in amortized in your financial statements. One of the newer items, which is about the information technology arrangements, very similar to leases, but now we're looking into information technology. And this is where you have arrangements over a prolonged period of time, and you do need to recognize the intangible asset as a result of these arrangements. Next slide. As I mentioned to you, we do use specific tools to do an analysis of the data. And this is what one of the reasons why an electronic audit tends to create a lot of efficiencies, but also it is more effective because it allows us to really analyze practically your entire trial balance, your general ledger, and look for unusual items. There were no unusual items or matters that were identified as a result of these procedures. Next slide. As I mentioned to you, we do not have material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. We did identify some best practices and recommendations that we have for management in the area of IT. However, they do not rise to the level of a material weakness or significant deficiency, which we are required to bring to your attention and put it in writing. Next slide. There are new accounting pronouncements that are going to go into effect over the next 2 years. Next slide. And I'm not going to go into the details of those new standards. Our commitment to you is to provide the necessary information to management so that they can be implemented over the next coming years. Next slide. And once again, these are the different standards that went into effect. And for example, for what was effective for fiscal year 24, GASB statement number 100 was not really applicable to the organization. And in 25 and 26, what you see here, GASB number 101, 102, and 103, that has to deal with compensated absences, certain risk disclosures, as well as some revisions to the financial reporting model will be going into effect. By far, the most significant one being 103, and that's going to be effective for fiscal year 26. Next slide. Next slide. And this is where it brings me to our reminders in that it is management that owns the financial statements. The roles and responsibilities of you as being in charge of governance, management, owning the financial statements, and our role as being the auditors, they were listed in our engagement letter that was submitted earlier during the year. All of the significant accounting policies are listed, significant policies are listed in the notes to the financial statements. We evaluated them, and we believe that they are in accordance with the standards. There were no controversial issues for which there was no authoritative guidance. Had there been any, we are required to bring them to your attention. Next slide. There were no past audit differences. There was one reclassification of $1.1 million within cash. That adjustment has been reflected in the financial statements, and it was a reclassification issue that we had. There were no disagreements with management over audit or accounting issues. We're not aware of management having consulted with other accountants or auditors over audit or accounting matters. There were no conditions placed on us prior to being retained as your auditors. Next slide. And also, there were no difficulties in dealing with management during the course of the audit. It was a collaborative effort. Your audit really takes about 4 months from beginning to end, from the time that we actually start gaining understanding of what has happened to the time that we start performing preliminary procedures and ultimately doing final procedures to test the balances and reporting here to you. Overall, we believe that it was a good collaborative process. There were no irregularities, fraud, or illegal acts that were identified during the course of the audit. I do need to remind you that a financial statement audit is not a forensic audit, but we do perform limited procedures, primarily in the form of inquiries, gaining an understanding if there are any issues from allegations of fraud, allegations of inappropriate behavior by individuals within the organization. And that goes at all levels. Just like we ask management if they're aware of any issues of the board's behavior, we also ask the board members about management. And it's a two-way process. But there were no such issues that were brought to our attention or that we identified during the course of the audit through our procedures. And the last thing I do need to remind you is that management will be signing a representation letter where they indicate that we have been provided with complete access to all of the records of the organization. And that is all we have for you today. Any questions?
Thank you. Director Gracia, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you very much for your work. I have no questions and no comments.
Thank you. Director Bloomer
No questions or comments, just thank you for coming today and making the presentation.
and Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Thank you very much for the work. It's a very significant piece of effort, and compliments to the staff for getting another good, clean audit report. Thanks.
Vice President Bowman.
No difficulties with management. Way to go.
We're very difficult to work
Yeah,
with.
right. But thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate all the hard work over the last few months, both from staff and from your firm. And thank you for coming today. All right. So I think this is an action item. I'll look for a motion to.
I so move.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So I have a first from Vice President Bowman and a second from Secretary Treasurer McKenna. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Right, so with that, we can move to the Secretary Treasurer's report for October 2024. Mr. McKenna.
The operating fund received $4.3 million in water sales revenue, $96,000 in recycled water sales revenue, and $71,800 in construction deposits. The $100,000 was included for Conservation Incentive Program participation from Central Energy Center. We paid out $5.3 million in accounts payable, which included $1.055 million to Southern California Edison, which is $44.72 per customer. Year-to-date water sales are 3% over budget, revenue is 7% over budget, and expenses are 14% under budget. The operating fund, there are 23,609 active potable water accounts, which is an increase of 6. 34 accounts were turned off for non-payment. Over the last 12 months, an average of 24 accounts per month are turned off for non-payment. In the general fund, we received just over $1 million in property taxes, $22,000 in replenishment assessment funds from private pumpers, $534,000 in state water project refunds. We also received $33,000 in power sales from Southern California Edison for the Whitewater Hydro. We paid out $1.3 million in state water project charges for a year-to-date total of $9.1 million. On the wastewater fund, we received $229,000 in wastewater revenue receipts and paid out $178,000 in accounts payable. There were 2,249 active sewer accounts in October 2024, an increase of 5. That's the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Grasha, do you have any questions for the report from Ms.
No
Secretary
questions, no
McKenna?
comments. Thank you.
Okay. Director Bloomer.
I have one question on the $100,000 from Sentinel. Is that a new commitment, or is it just paid out on the how much they had?
So for
Promise.
Sentinel, that is an annual commitment that
Okay.
they have made. So it's nothing new. It's just a continuation of the agreements that we have
Okay.
had for them for several years.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Secretary Treasurer McKenna, you probably don't have any more questions for yourself?
I do not.
Okay. Vice President Bowman.
We are 14% under budget of the expenses. Do you expect that to catch up, or are we going to stay below under budget?
Honestly, it depends on the year. You know, typically we do see that we are under budget because we have a little bit more lofty goals for the year, and then we are unable to meet that by different circumstances that are encountered through the year. However, we have had years where we do track right along with that. So it's not to say that we will not catch up, but typically we are under. Now, when it comes to the under budget, also what the trend looks like in the beginning of the year, we are always typically pretty far under as we gear up for the projects that are going to happen later on in the year that are going to take those expenses, that are going to expend those expenses that have been set aside for them. So we typically see we're really far under, and then we start to catch up. Will we come right in on our target? Hard to say. We'll know further on in the year, but that is the typical trend that we do see, because when we target the expenses out throughout the year, it's pretty much a straight line unless we know some major expenses are going to happen in some particular months. But for the operating fund, typically it's just a straight line, divide by 12, unless we know it's going to happen on a particular month.
Thank you.
All right. I have no further questions, so we can move to item 10, which is our general manager's report. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Ortega and members of the board. Pretty light report, but for the first item, just excited to announce that DWA's grass removal program received a federal grant in the amount of $100,000. We have been awarded this grant from the Water Smart program in 2020 and 2022. I wanted to highlight that Ernie Valenciano, who's in the audience there. Hey, Ernie. So Ernie, he worked and completed and submitted this grant for the agency, and just happy that Ernie was able to do that for us, and we'll continue to work through this grant and the financial commitments. And here's our system leak data information, 19 leaks over the past couple weeks. Again, a couple of the streets are in our 2025 capital improvement project budget, and then we have Ramon Road is in our summer 2025. And on the next sheet, there's again, here's this new chart with the number of leaks on each street with the labor hours. So there were 137 total labor hours committed towards those 19 leaks. And general managers meetings and activities, just to highlight, there were some state water contractor meetings that I attended and some tribal mediations. And then on the 26th, we had our executive committee meeting. And with that, I will, oh, and one other item I just wanted to mention, it's not on listed on the report, but yesterday, DWR did announce the initial allocation of 5% for the State Water Project. So hopefully that number will increase as the year goes on here, but the allocation was based on November 1st forecast data that did not include the wetter conditions that began back on November 20th. So, and for DWA, 5% is 2,788 acre feet. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Director Grusha, do you have any questions or comments for our general manager?
One question on the hours to do the repairs is there were several different 10 hours, 12 hours, and 5 hours. Is that so? If you've got 3 guys on the job, and is that it's 3 hours times 3, or is that?
Yeah, it's for each individual. So if there's 5 individuals and they work for an hour, that's 5 hours total.
Right, okay, good. And so they're fast, it looks like to me. I guess
They try to be as efficient as possible.
yeah,
with that.
that's incredible work, everybody. Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
I have none, thank you.
All right, and Vice President Bowman.
None from me.
Okay, and having called in a lot of these reports on my own, since so many of them seem to happen in my neighborhood, I can tell you they are very fast. And just by observation, it looks like the 12th of November was a very busy day for that.
Yeah, there are days. It's interesting how there will be a day where you'll have 4 or 5 leaks that just pop up, and then you'll go several days with no leaks. So.
Thank you. All right, so with that, we can move on to item 11, which is Director's Reports on Meetings and Events attended on behalf of the agency, and we'll start with Director Grusha.
Well, mine is pretty straightforward. I attended the non-compensatable event, which was the State Water Contractors Board meeting on the 21st, and the Coachella Valley Water District did not have a scheduled meeting after Thanksgiving, and so that was canceled or not scheduled, I guess, and that was it. No other meetings.
All right, thank you. Director Bloomer.
So I had attended the executive meeting on November 26th, and then yesterday, December 2nd, we had a strategic planning committee meeting. And also, I also attended the JPIA board meeting yesterday, where Desert Water Agency was recognized for a few awards in the different programs. And then also our Facilities and Safety Officer submitted a project and received an award for the HR LaBounty Safety Award. So I don't know what the project was. It wasn't highlighted at the meeting, so maybe you can
We'll
send
add
what it
that.
was or,
We'll add that to the report next meeting.
yeah. So that was nice.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
I did not attend any outside meetings in the recent period.
Okay. And Vice President Bowman?
Just one, the 26th was our executive committee meeting, and that was
Okay.
it.
Thank you. And for me, the only item would be the latest cybersecurity event or training or whatever we're calling it. And that was yesterday. And with that, we can move to director's comments and requests. And that would be starting with Director Grasha.
Just to flag my show, I appreciate the words of the governor, spoke out thanking Desert Water Agency for our vote to approve participation in the Delta Conveyance Project that came out in a press release a day or so after our vote. So just wanted to note that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
No comments or requests, thanks.
All right. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Well, I've had an eventful few weeks. Since I got up out of this chair on November 5th, the country has elected a new administration, and I'm confident we'll get through it. We got through the last one, but it will be bumpy. When you were having your last meeting discussing Delta Conveyance, I was on a ship transiting the Panama Canal, and really great experience for a retired engineer, let me tell you. But what I noticed in Panama, and this goes to climate change, Panama is, my notes just went off the screen, is busy relocating an indigenous population of so far 1,200 people. They have to move them because their habitat, where they live, is an offshore island that is being submerged by sea level rise. Ultimately, we'll have to move 38,000 people in 63 villages. And that's happening in the United States too. In Louisiana, the federal government just spent $48 million to acquire land for descendants of the Choctaw Indians to build new homes on, because the island of Ile des Rochers, where they live, is crumbling into the sea. So climate change is not a hoax. Climate change is not an insignificant problem, as some of the incoming cabinet members think. Climate change is a serious issue. I sat with somebody who's a resident of Asheville, North Carolina. She told me that her house sitter just informed her the water supply was back on after 53 days, resulting from a hurricane. Florida has adopted a policy of not using the word climate change in any official document or website. The federal government may do likewise, but didn't stop them being hit by 2 Category 4 hurricanes in 13 days. One of those hurricanes killed over 200 people. Imagine what it would be like here if there's no water supply for 53 days. There would be nothing growing in my backyard, I think. So that is why I think our general plan does not address this question. It is fatally flawed. And that's not a metaphor. Fatally flawed is normally a metaphor. But a defective general plan, if all the agencies in California did that, people would die. That's how fatally flawed it is. So I'm going to ask again, let's look at that general plan. Let's fix it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
That's quite a deal when an island is becoming less of an island. That's pretty heavy. Thank you for sharing that. Nothing else from me.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing else from me. So I see it's now 5 of 9. If the board could convene in the conference room at 5 after 9 for a closed session, that would be great. And with that, we'll close this part of the public meeting, and thank you everybody for attending today. All right, welcome back to the public portion of our meeting. I can say that we had no reportable action that was taken during the closed session. And with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.